Why Jenny Greenteeth, like the monster of Jenny Greenteeth, but then also having her as the character as well?
Well, I knew I wanted to write a book about British folklore and kind of adapt a character and tell it in a slightly different way. And then I was thinking about characters that haven't been done already, and I thought about Jenny Greenteeth and really only.
Welcome to the More Magic Book Club podcast, a podcast for fantasy readers dying to talk about the latest fantasy book you read and loved. Each month, we discuss a recent fantasy novel in detail, so you know you're not the only one who hated that character or wanted to move into that fantasy world. And you also don't have to worry about exhausting your friends who just don't get it. I'm your host, Demi Utley, an author and avid fantasy reader who also runs the More Magic newsletter over on Substack.
And I'm your co-host, Marianne Boules. I am a children's picture book author, Corgi mother, and Brandon Sanderson fan, although we prefer to call ourselves Sandy Heads.
So excited to dive into our latest read with you and can't wait to hear what you thought. Since we're discussing the book in detail, there may be a few spoilers, so listen at your own risk. And now it's time for us to dive into this month's book. Hello, everyone. Today we have a very fun episode because we are discussing a truly unique book that is, in my opinion, everything that fantasy should be. Greenteeth by Molly O'Neill is about Jenny Greenteeth, a grumpy lake monster whose quiet life is interrupted when an angry mob attempts to drown a witch in her lake. Jenny is pulled into a grand adventure that brings her face to face with other characters from British folklore. This quest of found family provides a fun, enjoyable escape that you won't be able to put down. I personally read through the second half just so fast because I could not stop reading it. Greenteeth was also selected as Barnes & Noble's speculative fiction pick for March this year, 2025. And we are very fortunate because today the author, Molly O'Neill, is joining us. Welcome to the podcast, Molly.
Hello. Thanks, Demi. It's really nice to be here. Hi, Marianne.
Thank you so much for joining. For everyone listening, I want to just kind of give a quick update on the structure for today. So we're doing things a little different since we have her here. Typically, we always talk about spoilers unless we have a themed episode, but today we're going to split this into two parts. So the first part, we're going to not go into spoilers. We're just going to talk about the book. If you're curious about reading it and what you can expect, we're going to talk about it in that sense. And then the second half, we are going to go into spoilers because especially for this book, I just have to talk. We have Molly here and we just have to talk about the end. So if you read the book, definitely listen to the second half because we're going to get to the parts that we know you want to talk about because you just have to talk about them with this book. So that's just an update on the structures. Okay, let's go ahead and just dive right into it. So we wanted to ask you, we were just talking, you're originally from the UK. So how did your personal background and just your experience in general inspire this story and its setting and sort of motivate you to create this tale?
Yeah, so all the settings of this story are places I know very well and have lived in or spent a lot of time visiting in. And I think that really helped me write it. So the initial start of the story is set in the Cotswolds, which is where I grew up. And I think that really shows in the way I wrote it. I tried to instill that sense of place because I spent a lot of time growing up wandering around the hills, the Cotswolds, walking the dogs and finding little hidden pathways and climbing up trees and things like that. And I have a really big connection to that part of the world, and then all the other places they visit on their quest are the places I know really well. And so I was really inspired by the location and some of the lesser known folklore, because when you grow up in the UK, there's lots of history everywhere. So the village I was born into, which is called Compton Abdale, has all Roman remains in it. And then the house that I moved to in Cheltenham had an old well in the back garden. And so there's kind of that stuff all over the place, if you know where to look.
That's very cool. Molly, where in the Cotswolds did you grow up?
So I grew up in the south of the Cotswolds, in a town called Cheltenham, is where I had spent most of my youth. And right at the end of the book, there's a scene on Cleve Hill where they kind of are looking out over Cheltenham, or what would become Cheltenham. It's a tiny little village at the time. And that's somewhere I used to walk all the time with the dogs as a kid. Hill and Cleve Common.
I love that. We were actually just talking about how that area, we were talking about Oxford, but I feel like England in general, and obviously Europe compared to the US, which is such a new country. It's so just inherently magical. Were you living there when you were writing the book, or had you already moved overseas at that point?
No, I moved to Australia in 2019, and I was writing this in, I think, 2022. I started in April 22. But because of COVID, I hadn't been able to go back home for 3 or 4 years at that point. So I was kind of reimagining it through my memory. As I was writing the book, I was going through all the places that meant a lot to me and remembering what it was like and trying to picture it in my head. And so it was almost like therapy as well as writing a book.
Yeah, like processing it. Have you been back? Well, I'm assuming you've been back now since you wrote it, because I feel like if you're writing this very fantastical story and then you go back, was part of you expecting, Jenny to just pop out of the water when you got home?
Yeah, I went to visit my brother who lives in Guildford and went for a walk on the canal. And I was like, oh, Jenny would love this. Like there was lots of like trees against the water, and it was really beautiful. So I was thinking she would like that. Yeah. So I've only been back once, but I'm about to go back again. And I'm going to go back to Cornwall, where a lot of the early part of the book is set as well. So I'm excited about that.
That is really exciting. So I've actually been to Cheltenham, Molly.
Really?
Yeah. I'm obsessed with the Cotswolds specifically for that, where history meets nature. And when you said you walked with your dogs through the hills, I could imagine it, because my husband and I did that trip where we walked from village to village, starting in Cheltenham and then ending, I think, in Burton on the Water. So it was like 30 miles or something like that in 3 days. But I remember we walked through this huge sprawling field that was littered with what they called the Roman trash and Paleolithic trash, like actual like 5,000-year-old arrowheads just on the floor that you just have to kind of dig through the flowers to get. They're right there. So I actually have some they're like my most prized possessions. I have some in my closet. So it's such an honor to meet someone from the place of J.R.R. Tolkien, the Cotswolds.
Yeah, I always describe it to people as being like the Shire. It's very kind of beautiful, very green, rolling hill, lots of farmland. So yeah, it's exactly what I'm talking about then.
Yeah, even right down. Actually, it's so funny you brought up the Shire. My husband and I were walking through a hill with sheep, which is where I discovered that I love sheep and fear cows. Was where I is a great important discovery for me. But my husband and I were like, why does it feel like we are in the Shire? What is going on? And we Googled it, and it turns out that J.R.R. Tolkien is actually from the Cotswolds, and he based the Shire off of the Cotswolds. And the whole book is about, the Lord of the Rings is about him having to leave the comfort of his beautiful, cozy, idyllic home to go fight in the World War. And it totally reshaped how I thought about Lord of the Rings too, because I feel like I understood J.R.R. Tolkien a little bit more too after that trip.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. I knew that the Shire was inspired by the region, but I didn't realize that his experience with the war impacted that. That's so interesting. Well, it must be a place that just inspires kind of quests, because that's the same for this book as well. Is this that was a theme, which we'll talk about more in the spoilers half, but that definitely feels like a bit of a theme for this book as well, of leaving the place where you're comfortable and going off on an adventure in a way to protect your homeland in a similar way to what you were just saying. So we won't go into too much of that because I don't want to give any spoilers right now, but I would love to hear why Jenny Greenteeth, like the monster of Jenny Greenteeth, but then also having her as the character as well.
Well, I knew I wanted to write a book about British folklore and kind of adapt a character and tell it in a slightly different way. And then I was thinking about characters that haven't been done already. And I thought about Jenny Greenteeth, who really only pops up in a handful of books. Like she makes a very brief appearance in Terry Pratchett's The Wee Free Man, which is one of my favourites. And I just really like the idea of a character who's such a nothing burger in most fiction, who's kind of a very minor villain to be quickly dispatched and sent on their way. And I just thought that was a really interesting idea to play with.
Is Jenny Greenteeth like an old mythological character? Because I hadn't encountered this type of, I guess, I don't want to say a creature because that's kind of dehumanizing her, but then it's like, but she is a monster, so I don't know exactly how to describe her, but this being before, is it like an old British folklore thing or something that's a little more modern?
Yeah, she pops up kind of across the UK under different names in in the north she's called Jenny Greenteeth or Peg Powler or variations on like Granny Greenteeth. You know how kind of a lot of these folklore creatures are more at least packaged as storytales so that children take them more seriously. So kind of the point of Jenny Greenteeth is to stay away from still waters you can't see the bottom of, so children won't fall in and drown. But you can't tell children that because they don't care. So you have to say like, stay away from the pond or Jenny Greenteeth will get you. So she really has no story attached with her other than she'll eat kids and she kind of lurks in waters you can't really see through. And that made that she was a really blank slate for me to play with. And I like the idea of keeping her kind of grim and still capable of eating children in a way.
That's so interesting. Is Jenny Greenteeth? Because again, I don't know, Marianne, have you heard of Jenny? Have you heard this character before?
Never. Yeah. I thought it was something like, yeah.
Yeah. Is that something that you grew up in as a kid? Like where kind of everyone, you know, has heard of Jenny Greenteeth? Or is that...
No, I don't think I had heard of her. I think I came across her for the first time in Pratchett.
Okay.
Yeah. But those sorts of creatures are kind of all over the place in the UK. Like there's very localized legends. In the way that we have a lot of local accents, there's lots of very small niche legends that if you walk 30 miles away, you're like, wait, they believe that over there? That's crazy. Those lunatics. We believe something much more sensible.
Yeah, the monster in the lake, of course.
I mean, that's just common sense.
Yeah, that's so... Yeah, it's so interesting. I really like Jenny as the character, and I was a little hesitant to pick up the book because I was like, oh, something from the perspective of a lake monster sounds gruesome. I don't know if I want to read that. But it's not billed as horror, and it's not horror for anyone listening. It's definitely a fantasy kind of quest type story. But I loved the voice. So from the first line, I meant to have the book next to me. I don't have it next to me right now.
I have it.
But do you want to read the first line? Because I feel like it just like, yeah.
All right.
Or maybe it's the first two sentences.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, it was the first two. The witch looked surprised to see me, her eyes blinking furiously at me through murky waters. I don't know why she was so astonished. It was my lake she'd been thrown into. She should have expected I'd come and see if there was anyone worth eating.
Like that's just such an iconic opening. I love that. It was like as soon as I read that, I just could not stop. That's so yeah, I loved it. Was it hard to fall into that kind of voice, or did that beginning come to you pretty easily? I'm sorry, I'm asking like 8 questions at once.
Yeah, that beginning was definitely the first words I wrote, and I was like, oh, this is a really fun beginning. And then kind of the tone changes after those first 2 sentences, and you kind of skip back a little bit in time. Because when I wrote the first 2 sentences, it's like, well, this is great, but I don't quite know where I am yet. So I have to go back a little bit and set up the story a little bit more. And then I just kind of got into this really grumpy, house-proud lake monster vibe. But I still wanted to keep her a little bit scary. I didn't want to take away from the fact that she was still a monster.
Yeah, I loved it because I feel like there are a few parts where she's talking about like how she cleans her lake and just like the lake maintenance that she does. I was like, oh, these details are so fun, and it really brought her to life in a way that I mean, I wasn't expecting, because I was like, ooh, a monster, I don't know, but then she's like cleaning, making sure her lake's clean, and she's very proud of her lake and how clean it is, and her relationship with the fish. I forgot what kind of fish it was. Is it a carp?
Pike. Yeah, it's a pike.
Yeah, she's so fun. And the voice, I feel like she continues throughout the book to have that kind of a little bit of, I wouldn't even say snark, but just like grumpy humor that is just so fun to read. And yeah, I loved her character. I think she was a lot of fun.
I laughed out loud. Like her first opinion of the villain is he must be very stupid. And that just made me I was like, that's beautiful. That's just, that's the kind of woman I want in my life, monster or not.
Yeah, she has very strong opinions about everyone, which is, it's so fun.
Well, she's quite old. She's like a 1,200 years old, I think, at the start of the book. And I think, although she acts almost like a young person, because physically she's still very strong, I was trying to capture some of that crotchety old person vibe into the text as well. And also I like to remember that she's been on her own for a long time. And I know when I'm on my own for like a weekend or something, I get very set in my ways. And I was like, oh, it'd be so much worse if I was in a lake for 1,200 years. I would definitely have very strong opinions on really minor things like the way that water flows through the lake.
I feel like you definitely brought that to life. She definitely felt very, just old
crotchety.
And, like get off my lawn.
Nonsense.
Only it's like shore instead.
Yeah.
So another question that I wanted to ask is the time period, because you said she's about 1,200 years old and at the start of the book. How did you choose that particular point in time? I think I said in the overview, it starts out by a witch being thrown into lake, which happens on the first page in the first line. How did you land on that?
Well, that was because I knew I'd settled on Jenny as the main character, but I knew that kind of her personality and the person she was never going to leave her lake on her own. She was never going to go out and then meet someone and become friends that way. The only way she was going to become friends or interact with other people is if they were literally thrown into her lake. But I'd set her up as a grumpy lake monster who eats people. So if no one would go swimming in her lake naturally, and if they did, they would immediately run away. So I needed someone to be in the lake, unable to get out, and she would be forced to interact with him. And she has to make that initial choice. Do you eat the witch or do you save the witch? So it was only by literally forcing her to that point that she would interact with someone. And then I was thinking, well, why would anyone be in that situation? Oh, maybe it was because witch trials that are kind of doing witch dunking, that sort of thing. And that really guided the setting and the time period for me. And then that was fun because I got to have kind of an evil pastor, and I got to have Temperance, which is the name of the witch, which is a really fun Puritan-y name, and kind of enjoy it because that's not a period of time I knew a lot about. It was fun to look into that a little bit.
Yeah, I love that because I feel like anything with the witch trials, which my history is not the best, so I don't know if the Salem witch trials overlap with like the witch trials in the Cotswold region, but I'm assuming they're roughly the same time period.
Chip in on this. So the witch burnings in Europe happened for several hundred years, and the Salem witch trial was on the tail end of that several 100-year period. Fun fact, Molly. So I've been to the Rhine River, which is funny because there's a call out to the Rhineland in your book. It's very eerie, but I'm appreciating the just absolute majesty of the nature of that area. One was in London, one was in the Rhine River. And then I'm just like, wow, this place is so beautiful, so peaceful, so idyllic. And then the tour guide points to that exact area that I'm appreciating and says, and this is where the great and horrible witch burnings of 1500 took place without fail.
Yeah, so the book I set in 1631, which I don't think I say in the book, but that's kind of the year ahead of my mind. So it was the start of Charles I's reign. And I knew that it was kind of roughly around the time that there were like Puritans leaving England, and that was starting to churn up because there was about to be the English Civil War that was going to happen between the Roundheads and the Cavaliers. So it was a kind of a decade or so before that, I think, that I wanted to set the book. But I really could have said it pretty much if I hadn't wanted to be that specific about the time period. Like you said, there's lots of times where there's witch problems going on in England.
For anyone who's thinking about reading the book or who has read the book, did you have anything in mind when you were writing it for kind of like the experience you wanted them to have as they're reading, or anything you wanted them to just kind of walk away with after reading it, like a certain emotion or any themes that you wanted to just stay top of mind for any readers of this book?
Well, I think my primary aim is always for just readers to enjoy my work, or at least have an emotional reaction to it, even if they absolutely hate it. That's kind of fun as well. Sometimes it's good to read something you hate. But on a deeper level, I hope it encourages people to read lesser known folklore. Like, there's a lot of amazing stuff out there from different regions and different cultures. And I would love for people to be like, oh, well, I've never heard of this, but I enjoyed it. I'm going to go and look into Thai folklore or South American folklore. And then also kind of that ordinary people can fight against huge people is always a good message to put out there. And it can be very unlikely people against impossible odds and still worth fighting and doing something about it. So.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I feel like that was the thing that I walked away with when I finished reading the book, was just, you can be a monster, a literal monster, and still grow and evolve and have an adventure, and maybe just like, maybe you do leave your lake or your metaphorical lake and see what's out there. Okay, for anyone listening, that's the end of the spoiler-free version of this interview. So we're going to move on to the spoiler part. Hello, everyone. So we are continuing our discussion with Molly O'Neill about Greenteeth, and now we're talking about spoilers. So if you've not read the book, do not listen to this, because in my opinion, it will make it less fun. But if you like to live a thrilling life, I guess go ahead and listen to this episode, because it's going to be a fun discussion. So with that out of the way, we are just dying to know who is the Earl King? And is that something you made up, or is that another kind of mythological folklore type character?
No, he's another mythological folklore character. So I was aware of him for a long time. I just thought it was such a great name. The Earl King just sounds really dark and creepy. A couple of different traditions. So in one tradition, he's associated with the High Fae, and he's the leader of a dark court, which is a parallel to the Sumi Queen, who runs the fair court, or the good High Fae. And then there's a tradition that comes out of Germany and the Black Forest, and he's associated with snatching up people who wander into the forest and never giving them back. And then if you go back even further, he's associated with the Nomadic steppes, kind of the Mongols and the Huns. And in that tradition, he has several daughters, and they're kind of a dark pantheon. So he just has a lot of fun things to play with. And I like the idea that he traveled and moved across from kind of the center of society, or the center of civilization as he sees it, which would have been the Mongol Empire, moving as he gets pushed out further west, and then ends up right in the UK, which at the time would be the very edge of civilization, because there was nothing island on the edge of the sea. And I like the fact he was really desperate and was pushed all the way out to shipping and puppy.
Yeah, I love that you spoke to those parts in the book where it kind of implies that he's this very ancient being that I think Jenny had heard of him.
I wanted him to be kind of a boogeyman for the boogeymen. So the way that Jenny is kind of the scary creature for the humans, he's kind of the scary creature for the Fae.
I thought you did such a good job, because it almost seemed like he was negative space, like negative matter. He's a black hole that I almost saw him. I wrote it in my little annotations here. He's almost like a metaphor for power. He just consumes and consumes and consumes, and he eats everything he touches. And it's like, I was scared of him. So I was like, how are they going to beat this guy? How are they going to beat a black hole?
I was trying really hard to make him as scary as possible, because I do love horror, and although I wanted it to be a cozy fantasy, I think sometimes it's cozy to be scared and to be, I think there's that part of like sitting and reading on a dark and stormy night, and it's very cozy even though you're scared.
Yeah, I feel like this definitely had that vibe of kind of like, oh, let's all sit around the campfire and tell this story about when a black hole comes to the city or to the town and what happens. And yeah, he was creepy. There was one scene, I think it's the first scene where Jenny sees him. She like scales the wall and is looking in the window, and he looks at her. I feel like that scene just like, yeah, it really creeped me out. I was like, oh, I do not like him. And I wasn't expecting it to go there. I was prepared for it to be like her in Temperance, like kind of that being the conflict. And then it went even further and was like, oh, he's not just an evil pastor. He's the embodiment of evil, Yeah.
And I love that you used smell, which is something that it might be a little bit underutilized. But when I think of the Earl King, I think of putrefaction. I think of the rotting quality. I feel like you made it come through so strongly that I was disgusted when he scratched Temperance's hands, that I was almost relieved that Jenny Greenteeth cut off her hand. That's how disgusted I was by his touch. So great job from a fan.
Oh, I'm so pleased.
That's so funny. I was not glad that her hand was cut off. So,
Well, I'm a bit of a germaphobe, so I would,
just
like,
take the arm.
I don't need it.
I didn't even think about that though. I would be like, well, let's just get some soap instead of having to remove an actual limb to get rid of it.
200 years too early. But he should have
That's
come in the
true.
19th century. Then we would have seen soap versus the Earl King. Just kidding. And another question we have is a theme that I noticed a lot, and maybe we could talk about your opinion on, is that I really liked that Temperance was happily married with kids. I think, like, as older women, Demi has, a husband and a child. I have a husband and a dog child. Like, we don't want... It's nice to see this 16-year-old heroine, but it's really nice to see a mother fight for her family. It's very refreshing. And I felt like there was this theme. I wrote it down from the book, a great act of romance or the ordinary actions of any mother. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely wanted to play with that because I think often in these books, the ending is they get married and they have children and they live happily ever after. They never have any more adventures. And it definitely can feel sometimes like, oh, once that happens, that's the end of your life and you're no longer something worth writing about. And I wanted to play with that. And I like the idea of Temperance having this kind of huge, wonderful romance that just happens off page. And that her and her husband are very happy, very in love. And that she's never insecure in that it's kind of a rock that allows her to go and do things. And she is doing, I think, a lot of her things for her children. Even though I think she would be devastated without her husband, she kind of trusts him and she's never worried about leaving her kids with him. She's like, oh, well, he'll just parent like a parent will, like, even though it will be hard. Yeah, so that's kind of what I wanted to play with. And I do think that kind of the ordinary actions of any mother, I think lots of mothers would go off and do hugely sacrificial things, as they do all the time. And I think it's a huge... I think all the work that mothers do and that parents do every day is just as heroic as going off and slaying the dragon. And I kind of wanted to pay tribute to that in a way.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, thinking about the witch trials too, I loved that you had Temperance who is a mother and she is a witch and she's very powerful. So it's this time period where they're just trying to take away all of, women's power and autonomy and if you are powerful, I mean, she's literally thrown into a lake in the very beginning, but just showing that determination and kind of I really liked her character because it was definitely, I felt nothing would hold her down. Like she was gonna figure this out with or without Jenny. She was gonna like protect her family. And yeah, I think it really honored motherhood because I feel like for me as a mother, that's kind of how I feel. Like I'm like, I will like burn everything down to protect you. And she like has that energy. I was like, okay, yeah, I get it. I see it. I understand, which is very different from Jenny's like grumpiness, like I don't want to do anything, like just go away, know. And so they have this like nice kind of back and forth, which is a bigger part later in the book when Jenny's I'm blanking on the creature when she's in the other lake. Yeah, when she's there and she like they're kind of having their little fight. It's interesting to see that kind of contradiction play out between them because Jenny talks about her daughter throughout the book too, and then you realize that she had died, I think, was it a couple hundred years before? I don't remember the timeline.
He specified it, but it was, I think, probably about 100 to 50 years ago.
Yeah.
She's still very much in the denial stage of it all.
Yeah, I wonder, well, I mean, you wrote it, but for the characters, like in my mind, I'm like, maybe that's why she doesn't, like, she's so grumpy at Temperance because she's like, actively trying to deny that happened, and then she's faced with a mother who has young kids who she's trying to protect, and there's this like reckoning that she has to do with that as well.
I think she likes Temperance like initially because she thinks she looks so much like her daughter, and then I think she sees a little bit of herself in Temperance and like a mother who would do anything to protect her children, but she's pretty deep in denial about the whole thing. Like she's definitely still saying to herself, oh, she still lives around the corner. I haven't seen her for a while, but I could see her anytime I wanted. And that's kind of the core of the conflict with Brachus as well, because they're old friends, as you kind of find out throughout the book. And Brachus was the one who told her that her daughter had died. And she's just like, well, I never want to see you again. This didn't happen. Go away.
I thought the scene, the unicorn scene, was incredibly powerful for that reason. I think that was a plot twist of its own, that the realization that her daughter Jenny had passed away. And I also think it was a really deep message that you gave, because I always think, people always say, like, Temperance said, I'll kill anything for I'll do anything for my children, even slay a sweet, beautiful, sweet little unicorn. And I thought it was a really powerful scene when Jenny didn't let her happen. And I think it's just a strong statement about, like, the best version of motherhood is the one where she sees everyone as her child. And I thought that, like, Jenny, the character, was so interesting to me, because she's like, at the end of the book, I was like, I want to be Jenny. Like, she has such a strong character. Like, she is so strongly herself, and who she is so good that I was like, that is a lady that I could, like, maybe not the eating the maggoty fish piece, but she just has such strong character, and I love that about her.
Yeah, I was trying to say with that, like, it would still have worked if they'd killed the unicorn and taken the horn by force. Like, they would still have deleted the Alkane, but it would have damaged them all a little bit. And it was just better to like you say, like, to be respectful of everyone and not take those things by violence, because that way the Alkane would have won in a little way.
Yeah, thank you for doing that. I don't see that type of idea, like playing with that idea, often on the screen, unless you know of any books or movies. Let me know. But I just thought, like, it was really again, a lot of this book was really refreshing, really different than what I'm used to seeing.
Yeah, I feel the same way. There were, like, so many moments, especially the unicorn part, where you think it's going to go. You're like, well, Temperance is going to do it, of course. And even in the moment, I'm thinking that, and I'm horrified, because I think she's doing it, right? And Jenny, like, grabs
she's
her.
ready to go.
Yeah. And so it's like, and you're like, oh, don't do it. And then Jenny stops you, you're like relieved. And then when they come back and the other unicorn, dies to, like, give them the horn, it was so powerful. And I feel like this book, because Jenny's, just described as a monster, and I feel like this book does a good job of kind of honoring all creatures, like what Marianne was saying, because we have the dog, and we have different beings throughout the story. And I just, like, finished this, and I just felt so, like, warm. I don't know,
at peace with the world. Everything will be okay.
Yeah, like the exact opposite of the Earl King, where everything's, like, being consumed and bad. I was like, yeah, we're all connected, and everything can be beautiful, and, like, monsters can grow, and, like, there are all these different creatures, and you don't have to kill the unicorn to achieve what you want and to protect your community and your families. I did want to ask so we had the 3 challenges, which this is, like, such a classic Quest type of story. How did you select the challenges? Was that also inspired by, other tales that we have missed that you'd heard, or did you create those purely like, oh, I would have something with a unicorn, so we're going to add a unicorn here?
Well, when I started off drafting the books, I do my drafts kind of in Excel. So I have, like, this chapter, this will happen. I'd only had one quest, which was getting the poison from the boar in the silver cone. And then I was like, I'm having so much fun writing this. I'm not ready to be done. And to be, like, kind of turning for home at that point, I was like, I'm going to throw some more chapters in there. So I added another few challenges. And I was like, also, it needs to be a little bit long. It's going to be too short at the moment. So I was like, well, where do I want to go in my head? And I was like, well, Wales, obviously, and then Scotland. So that kind of evens it out nicely. I've got the 3 countries of Britain. I know Northern Ireland's another country, but that's in the UK, in part of Britain. So I was like, well, let's try and even out that way. Let's go for, and I need to create some sort of weapon to destroy the Alkane. So you can't use silver to make a dagger or a sword because it's too soft. So I'm going to need some iron, and I need something else. So I was like, well, I'll go and get iron from Wales. And then I like the idea of having kind of meteorite star iron. And then from Scotland, unicorns, the national animal of Scotland, for some insane reason. So I was like, well, unicorns in Scotland sound fun. We'll go and get a unicorn horn there as well. And then I really only had very rough ideas. I was like, they'll go to Wales and get some iron, and then I'll go to Scotland and get a unicorn. So when I was starting to write the chapter, I was like, I have no idea, but somehow they end up having got this thing. And even with unicorns, I was like, well, I think she is probably going to kill it. And then I was like, oh no, she didn't do it. But she still needs to get it. What are we going to do? So I was kind of discovering it as I was writing.
Yeah, you like wrote yourself into a corner and you're like, oh no, they need the horn, but I can't do this. Like, yeah, I loved it. Well, I feel like the description of the scenery, the one when they get to the unicorn, they get to the shore, the way you described the scene, it was just so visual and so immersive. And yeah, and the unicorns themselves, I don't know. I loved, the writing, just your prose itself and the way you're describing things. This book is just so immersive and so fun. And the challenges, I'm glad there were 3 challenges. So I'm glad you added them in because it was so fun to just experience them. And I don't know if you ever saw the movie Shrek. I was telling Marianne that this reminded me of like British Shrek in my mind, because it's like they go on like a quest and like there are fun sidekicks and there's this monster, and I was like, because I didn't want to tell people, I like told so many people to read this book, and I was like, how do I tell them to read it without saying, hey, if you like King Arthur, you're gonna like this, because I feel like that would kind of spoil it. So I just started saying it's like Shrek but with British folklore, and people were like, okay, I'll read it. And I was like, I feel like that's pretty true. That's how it feels in my mind. So hopefully that's not offensive and you like Shrek, but
But Molly, when I was going through, I was looking at my annotations after I finished the book, and I realized for the number of clues that you have in here to Jenny's true identity. So if I could just read you, for example, chapter 5, the strength of the Jenny is in the strength of her water, and my lake is large and healthy. And that's ironic because that's not why she's strong, right? She's strong because her lake is at the seat of power, right? Yeah. So I thought, can you tell me, I always am very amazed by how authors do this, like the crumbs that they leave, because it feels so rewarding as the reader to pick up those crumbs. What was that process of foreshadowing was like? What was it like? Did you put them in after you finished the book or during or before? How does it work for you?
So I started off just putting little bits of King Arthurian stuff in there because it's an English fantasy book. Like, there's going to be some references to Arthur in there. Like, you can't really get away from it. And it's just fun to put in. And then I originally was just going to have the sword be like a throwaway line, but like she's got this old sword sitting in the lake. And then I was like, oh no, I think I do want to use Excalibur at the end to maybe defeat the Elfie, but I really don't want it to be obvious. Or like it kind of be like an Easter egg, people spoke out it. So I was throwing in like she had the sword with her, and then she never gets cut when she's wearing the sword, like she never bleeds. Because if you're carrying the sword or in the sword in the scabbard, the mythology is that you'll never get cut. So a couple of times people are like, this doesn't make any sense. How do you catch that sword in your hands when she's fighting the soldiers and your hands are fine? And even when she breaks her ankle, she doesn't break the skin. So I was really enjoying putting that in there. And then
catch that.
Your mind just blew again.
And then I also knew like I had to get the swords into the lake so that they wouldn't take it into the village, or like so that she couldn't take. So Jenny couldn't be the one to take the sword down into the crystal cave. So I had to get it in that way through Temperance. And then when I finally realized that she was the Lady of the Lake, I was like, well, I don't want her to have been the original Lady of the Lake. I want her to kind of, that be part of her ending, that she takes on this responsibility of being like, I'm going to, going forward, take that role as the Lady in the Lake. So yeah, it was really fun to do. I love doing little Easter eggs and things like that.
I feel like I just got I literally just got chills. Like hearing you describe this, because I remember when I was reading it, because it's in one of the first scenes when you first mentioned the sword, and I was like, the way it was described, my mind was like, oh, it's Excalibur, but then completely like stopped thinking that. I was like, maybe it is, and then or like it was like some hint towards that, and then it like just left my mind. And then there's like another scene where she's with the like at the Knights of the Round Table. There's like some like flashback type thing, and I thought it again, and then still by the time I reached the end, I was still like, oh my God, she's the Lady of the Lake, and it's this Excalibur. Like what? And it was just so good. I've been dying for Marianne to finish this because I was like, I have to talk to someone about this. I just could not get over it. It was like, yeah, it was so well done. And then you like think about it, yeah, and then of course you're like, well, of course it was. But then as you're reading it, you just, yeah, it was so good. I loved it.
I was tricky because I knew I wanted Excalibur to be important at the end, but I still wanted the journey that they go on to produce the main dagger that originally kills or like displaces the Earl King. So that was kind of tricky because I didn't want it to be like, oh, we had this sword the whole time. It was all a waste of time. But luckily, we made some friends. So I did kind of drop in the scenes at the fairy court that Excalibur would have worked. Like that would properly destroy the Earl King forever. But the unicorn silver iron dagger would also kind of kill him as a one-off. And so yeah, it was tricky to try and balance that. So
this is just like so good because I don't know if the marketing materials, does it say it's related to King Arthur? I didn't know going in. I had no idea that there was like the Arthurian influences. And so yeah, I've been very careful to not tell anyone because that moment when you realize it was like just, yeah, it was so fun. But I did want to ask you because I was an English major and we had to take, British literature courses, and we read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. I don't know if you've read that, but it's because it's an older story we had to read for English class. But it is like a King Arthur quest thing. And I hadn't thought about that pretty much since I read it in college, like a decade ago. And then I read this book. And as soon as I finished it, I was like, reading Greenteeth felt so much like reading that. And it was written, hundreds of years ago. And I was like, man, you like pull that off so well. It really speaks to your skill as a writer to be able to bring that experience to the forefront for me as a reader, to just like feel like I'm reading this like kind of classic piece of literature for such a modern story, and also set like, I mean, the language is obviously different. It doesn't feel like you're reading, Beowulf or something, for example, but it like the actual experience of going on the quest and everything. It had, again, I'm from the US, I'm not British, so I don't know, but to me, it had that feel of like, kind of like being immersed in that folklore. And yeah, it was just so good. I finished, I was like, man, she's a really good writer, because like being able to do that with like this like book that came out in 2025, yeah, it was so good. I love this story so much.
I think a lot of it just comes from growing up in those influences, and I think I've read pretty much every Arthurian legend in one form or another, and I read a series of books called Arthur at the Crossing Places when I grew up, which was about a kid growing up in medieval England and seeing the story of King Arthur through like a seeing stone, and I really like the way that that author Kevin Crossley Holland interwove kind of a reality and then like mythology, and that always really stayed with me. And so yeah, I think it's very much as part of the fabric of growing up in the UK, especially growing up in the West Country where there's Glastonbury and Tintagel and Cornwall. That always felt kind of real to me, even though I knew it wasn't real. So it felt as natural as just like describing the countryside. It's like, oh, well, of course, it's got to be some Arthurian legends.
I need to brush up on my Arthurian legends, because if my childhood was a king in Sir Arthur's court, or a kid in King Arthur's court, and then I think there's the Sword in the Stone, and I think that's about it for me. So at the very least, I could probably start watching Merlin, which I think is but this definitely stoked my interest. So someone who doesn't come from, who knows very little, like I said, of Arthurian legends, this actually stoked my interest in Arthurian legends. So I'm excited. I'm probably going to start doing some Googling after this and seeing how much of the lore I can get into.
Yeah, there's lots of good books.
Yeah, if you have any that you'd recommend, that would be great. But also, is this an area where like, do you think you'll write more that have Arthurian legends? Because then you could just recommend, whatever book you're working on now if you're working on one. Yeah.
At the moment, I'm not doing any more Arthurian stuff. Yeah, because the next book I'm writing is set kind of in Roman Britain. And then, so that's coming out in February. And then I'm also writing a book set in Anglo-Saxon Britain, which I don't think will have Arthurian. So I haven't got any more Arthurian on my immediate to-do list. But I'd shout out Legendborn, which is really
I've heard of that.
I think it's probably YA, Arthurian spin on the Arthurian myths. And also the Arthur books by Kevin.
I'll have to check those out.
I'm super excited for your Roman Britain book. I can't wait to read it. And Anglo-Saxon. I went to an Anglo-Saxon church in close to Cheltenham when I was walking through to the next village, and I was super enchanted. So I am excited to read both. Both are interesting periods of time.
Yeah, so the Roman Britain one is coming out in February, and that's the last one that's like confirmed. And then the Anglo-Saxon one I'm currently just writing for fun. And I've also got kind of a Regency one that I'm writing for fun.
I didn't know you had a book coming out February 2026.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, we're going to have to put that on our list.
We're going to be in line the midnight before. So one more question for you, Molly, before the lightning round. Another theme question. So we've been talking a lot about how awesome Jenny is. I also really loved the character of Temperance, especially the theme of forgiveness. And what I thought was really cool was that Temperance is very forgiving of the people who hurt her, both in her neighbors who throw her into a lake and like the book says, very easily convinced to do so after a lifetime of healing them and being there for them. And she also forgave the soldiers who tried to kill her and Jenny. And I just thought it was a great lesson of forgiving the people who hurt you in service to fight the greater evil, which is like the poison that poisons them. Can you elaborate a little bit more about that theme and what your thoughts are?
Yeah, I really think like the kind of traditional thing to be like, I'm just going to kill everyone who ever hurts me doesn't actually lead to a better world. And I think you're exactly right. Like, if I actually want to improve things and I want to go back to my village in the way it was, then I'm going to have to forgive them and try and rebuild that. And with the soldiers, when they get attacked, like they really did think that they were trying to protect. Like they were right from the start, they were like, okay, you get behind us, we'll kill the monster. And in any other story, that would be the correct heroic thing to do. And so in their story, they're the heroes. And although we know that they're not, and hopefully there's kind of a lesson there about judging like from appearances, I think Temperance sees that the inherent, the underlying cause is not necessarily evil, and is just going to approve their actions if that's what she does. She just kills them or she just leaves them to die. And in a way, similarly with the villagers, like they are under the influence, but even if they did really believe that would trying to protect their village be the right thing. And I think you kind of see that again, and go back to Unicorn again, it's like in that case she's ready to do the dark thing to try and protect her family, and it's still not the right thing to do. And it's definitely not how I instinctively go about my life. You know, if someone runs in like, vengeance. But I generally find if I sit on it for a while and then I find out more about the person and like why they did that thing, I'm like, oh no, I do understand why you've done that. And it still doesn't mean I'm going to let them walk all over me. I'm still going to fight back, like the way Temperance fights back. But I'm going to try and move towards a more forgiving place.
I think that's such a powerful lesson for us to take home, because like you're totally right. My instinct is to survive, really. Like if I were Temperance, that book would have been one chapter, because as soon as Jenny saved me, I would have taken my husband, my children, ran out of there and been like, the villagers can be eaten by the Earl King for all I care. But Temperance actually saying, I am going to risk my life and my family's life to save these people who tried to kill me. It's just so humbling as someone who, like I said, would have probably ran away and been like, good luck, sayonara. So, question for you. I was just wondering, I was so curious about this, and since I have you, I should use my time to use it. When Jenny is spying on the parson in the parsonage, and there's a woman in there who's clearly a slave, clearly forced to put her hand in the fire. Is that the same lady that started the whole, like, was she the leader of the witch burning or of the witch drowning? Was it the same lady?
Yeah.
That was good. That was really good.
I didn't even realize that. Yeah.
So, but she never liked Temperance. She was always very jealous of her. And then the Elf King leans on that. He uses that to entrap people in their own kind of hatred and sadness and jealousy. But it doesn't end out well for them if they lean into that.
You can't see it, listeners, but I am snapping because it's just like mic drop.
Yeah, this book, I want to go back and reread it now because now you just brought up all these things I didn't even realize. And now what am I going to realize, like doing a second read through? We talked about the end a little bit, but did you, when you set out to write the book, I know you said you wrote that opening, I guess, paragraph. Did you know then that Jenny was going to be the Lady of the Lake when you started it? Or were you just like, I just want to explore Jenny?
No, I think it took me pretty close to the end of the first draft to realize that. And then I got to go back and put a few more things in. Like, I always knew it was Excalibur, but I didn't realize Chipping Appleby was Avalon until quite near the end of the first draft, because originally it was called Chipping Ashby. And then I changed it to Appleby when I knew that Avalon was the Isle of the Apple Trees. And I was like, oh, Chipping Appleby also sounds good. And then I can drop. Like, if you're a really serious Arthurian scholar and you're like, oh yeah, obviously Avalon is the Island of Apples, you'd be like, well, there's apple trees everywhere. This is probably suspicious. But I wouldn't have got that as a reader. So, at least the first
I
reader.
love hearing when stories just kind of, you're writing it and then you're like, oh, like the biggest twist at the end, I didn't even realize that I was going to go to that point. Because then it's fun for you too.
Yeah. Like, I'm a plotter, like I know I like to have like an overall arc, but then sometimes my characters will be like just go off in a completely different direction. I'm like, well, I wasn't expecting you to do that. And sometimes you need to rein them back in, and then sometimes you're like, well, let's just see where we go.
That. Okay. Well, we have the lightning round now, so we're going to ask you a handful of questions, and you can just give kind of quick answers, or go into however much detail you want. So the first one is there a particular scene or chapter that you're most proud of from this book?
I'm going to say the unicorn scene, because it was, I didn't know what was going to happen, and I didn't want it to be an easy victory. So, but I wasn't sure how it was going to work. And it was just so fun to write The Isle of Skye. It's one of my favorite books.
It was such a beautiful scene. I love that scene.
Yeah, one of my favorites. Are there any scenes you cut from this book that you wish you could share?
I don't think so, actually. There was a really fun first version of when they come back to see the Fae courts, and it turns out by that point, the Gwyneth has gone so far that you can no longer remember how to do it, and they kind of didn't know what to do. And I was like, well, I can't do that because then I don't know what to do. But I thought it was like originally it was, I was like, or like he was able to do the dagger creation and then kind of passed on, and I decided against that in the end. But I really like the theme of things passing on, but it just didn't make sense.
Is there a song that embodies this book in your mind, or anything that you listened to while you were writing it?
I tend to listen to like YouTube videos of fire crackling and stuff like that when I'm writing. So not really a song for this one in particular, but all that kind of the lines are very seasonable, which is probably the song I would think.
Where do you write, and is it the same place you like to read?
Well, no, I don't like to read while I write. So I write at my desk, or I write in a coffee shop, or I go to the library. So I guess I do like to read in the coffee shop, but yeah, I write at my desk in my house, or I take my laptop to the library. And often with my writing friends, we'll go and do a writing day. So we did one just last Saturday where we'll all go together and write and chat about what we're writing, and then go for lunch. So So yeah, that's really
Okay, so I
handy.
have a fun question. So if you could have one magical creature as a sidekick, what creature would it be?
Oh, it's going to be so difficult not to go for a dragon. um,
Well, you can. That could be your creature.
but I feel like that would be a little impractical. I'm going to go for a kraken, just because I know I said that dragons are impractical and krakens would be even more impractical, but I think that would be really fun. And you could just say, release the kraken all the time, which would be worth the price of admission alone.
Speaking of vengeance, someone bumps into you on the street and you're like, release the kraken.
Maybe it wouldn't be very healthy for me mentally, but it'd be great.
Yeah.
Or would it be very healthy for you mentally?
All right. And then our last question, how do you find magic in your daily life?
I like to kind of romanticize my life a little bit. I feel like to listen to music when I'm doing things and make sure that like I'm enjoying even just like walking to the train station, like put some nice music on and enjoy feeling like the wind on my skin. And then I get to spend quite a lot of time outdoors. So that's for my job, because I'm a geologist. So I'm always wandering around New South Wales and Australia looking at landscapes, and that always feels quite magical. Such a beautiful country over here. Yeah, I'm just really blessed to always live here.
Yeah, I love that. So we had the last question here. You kind of already talked about it, but the last question is, what's next? What are you working on anything new? So anything else you want to share about your projects or, your future, or the future of Jenny in your mind or anything like that?
Yep, so my next book is called MSgt and it's about the goddess of death and a Celtic British princess traveling to the land of the dead. It's set in very early Roman Britain, and that's out in February 2026. I've just seen a cover for it, and I'm very excited to share that soon. And then after that, that's the only thing I've got locked in at the moment. I'm just enjoying writing for writing's sake. So I'm working on a couple of projects, working on some short stories just for fun. Yeah, I think probably I'm happy with how I left Jenny for the moment. I'm excited to explore other stories. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been so much fun. We love this book, and it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thanks. It's been awesome. And I especially love chatting spoilers. It's really great to get into the meat of it.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we're actively working to record the next one. If you'd like more inspiration in the meantime, follow More Magic and the Little Ways on Substack, which we've linked to in the show notes below. Have a book you want us to discuss? Head over to moremagicpodcast.com and tell us what book we should read next. Until next time, happy reading, and we wish you more magic.